So we're back. Just recap. Variables, we write the keyword variable, we write whatever the variable name is, and then we set it to some value. And every time we use this variable name, it's going to give us the value that's contained on the variable. Okay, just to recap. Now, the next thing we wanted to do was talk about data types. So data types, we have strings, we have numbers, we have booleans, right? There's also there's more granular data types, like there's different types of numbers, there's ints, there's doubles, there's floats, right? Those are kind of within the same category, but they're defined differently. For now, we're not really going to dive too deep into that, because today we're going to cover a lot of the basic stuff, and later on you'll learn about more of the details. Okay, so different data types. The thing with booleans, though, they're used in conditionals. So what are conditionals? Something like this. So if bool, then I want to console.log it's true. Okay, so I'm going to comment this line out. Command / will comment it out so it doesn't run. Right? I clear this and I run it, and it prints it out. It's true, and it did that because this boolean is true. Right? If this whatever it is inside of the parentheses evaluates to true, then this guy will happen. Otherwise, else statement here, I'm going to console log false. Okay, so we run it, it's true. Now if we change this guy to false, it's going to print it's false. Okay, so the boolean decided basically whatever it is in the parentheses gets evaluated into a boolean. Now if you put a boolean in there, obviously it's going to evaluate to whatever that boolean is, right? But I can also put things inside of this conditional that will be evaluated into a boolean. And in JavaScript, and it's different for different languages, but in JavaScript, there are things that are truthy values and there are things that are falsy values. Truthy values, when put inside of a conditional, will evaluate to true. Falsy values, when put inside of the conditional, will evaluate to false. Okay, that's what it means. Now, some of the truthy values, right? So we have, let's take a look here. True, that's the number one truthy value. It's true. So true is a truthy value. Another truthy value, anything on a string, any string, is also a truthy value. So we put a string in here, and it doesn't matter what this string is. When I run it, it's going to run it's true, because this got converted into a boolean, and that boolean turned out to be true. Okay, so strings, true, they're both truthy. Something else that's truthy, any number, right? We put any number in there, we run it, it's true, right? And this is a way we can test to see if this value is truthy or falsy, right? So numbers are truthy values, strings are truthy values. Now what happens if I give it a number of 0? False. Okay, so numbers are truthy except for 0. Anything that's not 0 will evaluate to true. 0 will evaluate to false.
A negative number would be true.
Well, let's see. It's true. Everything that's not 0, that's a number, evaluates to true.
And why again are they always true? Strings and numbers.
It's just the way that JavaScript is defined. The way that they created the JavaScript, it's kind of, JavaScript is like very kind of, it's very lenient on things. It's very loose. It follows like certain conventions that are not as strict as other languages, so that other languages, it's like if you don't give it a boolean, it'll give you an error, right? JavaScript does a lot of things for you where, oh, you're giving me a string, maybe you mean it's true. I'm just going to pretend it's true, right? So it's very forgiving, but that can also be a double-edged sword, because a lot of times you'll see some errors or bugs in your code that was caused by JavaScript inferring this info that maybe you didn't mean it to be true, right?
So JavaScript is kind of intuitive for other...
JavaScript is very forgiving. it will not crash or break very easily. A lot of the times it will kind of run the code even if it's wrong. So in that sense, it's good and bad, right? It's good for beginners because it keeps it going, it keeps the flow going. But once your code gets complex and you have all of these things, you might not know where the error is because somewhere along the way it kind of inferred a true value or something like that. But there's other things, right? Okay, so we know that numbers, positive, negative, that are not zero evaluate to true. We know that strings evaluate to true, right? But what if I have a string that's empty? Now let's see. False. Right? So remember when we had a string with letters in it? We ran it, it's true. Now, when we have a string that's empty, it's false. Right? So empty string is also falsy value. A string with something inside of it is a truthy value. Right? So here, let's see, what else do we have? I think if we have null, this is also a falsy value. Right? Let's run it. False. Right? So null meaning that there's nothing there. That's JavaScript syntax for saying that it's empty. Okay. There's also this thing called undefined. Now, the way you will get undefined is that, let's say, we make a variable. We say this variable name is test, and that's it. We declare the variable, but we don't assign a value to it. Now, let's go ahead and console log what this test variable is. Undefined, right? So it's not yet defined because we haven't given it a value yet. We declared it, but we have not assigned a value to it, right? So it's undefined. Now, if we put in undefined values inside of our conditional, it's falsy value. See, undefined is also falsy value. So JavaScript has a bunch of these truthy values and falsy values, but I think it's easier to remember that there's only really a handful of falsy values, but there's many, many variations of truthy values. Any kind of string is a truthy value. Any kind of number is a truthy value. The falsy values are false, zero, empty string, null, undefined. Those are the main ones. There might be some other ones that are very obscure that we don't use a lot, but for now, just know that those 5 things are guaranteed to be false. Okay? So we know that if we put any type of value inside of the conditional, it'll evaluate to truthy or falsy, and then it'll continue to do whatever it is that it's else or this or that, right? So in these conditionals, notice that we chained these things together, right? We chained the if, and it's going to console log that. If this is false, we're going to run the else, right? So when we chain these conditionals together, there can be only one thing that happens. Both of them can never happen all at once, right? So in this statement, so the if statement opens here and it closes here. So in between this if statement, only one of these guys will ever evaluate, right? The same goes for if I have an else if statement, right? So let's say else if something, close it like that. All right, so let's say else if, say num, like that. And we're going to console log else if. And this is the else, right? And this is if. Okay? Else if. So we ran it. So this is, we ran the if statement and we chained on an else if to it. Right? So here the code ran down here, it did this, it put in the test, and at this point the test is undefined. So this evaluates to false. So if it evaluates to false, it's not going to do whatever it is that's within inside of the closure. So it's going to go to the next level of this if statement. Now the next level will evaluate whatever it is in this conditional. And if this is true, it's going to do the thing inside of the block. If it's false, it's going to go down to the next level. Okay? Now, when it evaluated this guy, num was 5. So 5 is a truthy value, so it became true. Now, if this is true, it's going to continue to evaluate whatever is inside of that block. So that's why we got else if. But notice that once this guy was evaluated, it didn't go to the next block and ran that one, because it's done. With the if, when you chain ifs together, if it runs one of the blocks, it's done. Okay, it will not go on to the next one unless all of the previous ones are false. Okay? Any questions? Okay, so yeah.
What's the difference between console.log and document.write?
Right. Were you the one who wrote that?
Yeah, that was me.
Okay, so console.log is a JavaScript function that will print things to your console. Okay, so here we're using JSBin, so our console, we just opened it up to the side. Now, if you're running HTML files on your browser, the console is going to be inspect element, right? So here we can actually, let's shrink this down again. So this is the actual size of the browser. So if we go, let's say this is our file, HTML file that we're running. If we do inspect element, we go to console. This is where our console is, right? So this is where it's going to be evaluating, like printing our stuff. When we do console log, it's going to be logged here. Okay. Now, when you do document.write, it's writing stuff to the DOM. It's actually writing stuff to your HTML. It's making HTML. Okay, so it's not printing to the console. And this is important to know because you're not always going to have HTML to put things on, right? So if you run JavaScript on terminal, you're not going to, on a server side, for example, you're not going to have these things on a browser like documents. So document is a part of the DOM, the document object model, that only exists in a JavaScript file, in an HTML file. Right? So HTML, yesterday we went over the DOM, document object model. That is like the family tree of HTML, head, body, and then so on and so forth. So when you're running these things, that is like specific to HTML. Right? So if you have JavaScript within the HTML, you can use document. But if you're running JavaScript without HTML, it doesn't have a document. So you cannot print things. But console.log it's a very useful debugging tool for developers. So it doesn't really change anything on our visual page, but it gives us a way for us to see some of the data on our console. Right? So in the terminal, you're going to see that logged in the terminal. It really depends on what is running your JavaScript. If the browser is running the JavaScript, you're going to see it on the console. If your node server is running the JavaScript, you're going to see it in the terminal, right? So you can run JavaScript in different environments. And yeah.
Can you explain the difference between console.log and return?
Okay. Right. So we're going to get into that when we talk about functions. And we're going to get into functions, let me see. Functions, it's coming up. So we're moving on. We're going to talk about equal signs. And then we're going to talk about printing to the console, we just kind of talked about. And then we're going to get into functions. So before that, though, I want to show you guys the equal sign stuff. All right, so JavaScript, and we have a console here. Okay, so to kind of add on to the conditionals that we're talking about, we know that if we put, I'm going to close this. Okay. So if we put variables or values inside of our conditional statement, inside of the parentheses, it's going to get evaluated and it's going to run the if conditions, right? Now, this is useful only if you have something that is static, that doesn't change, right? Now, if we wanted to have like conditions where we compare two things, right, we can do that. And those things will evaluate to a true or false value, and it'll run the conditional. So let's say if test as a string equals to test, right? Then it's going to log this if, right? So let's run that if, right? So this guy got run, meaning that this was true, right? So in addition to just putting values inside of the conditionals, we have these things called operators, conditional operators, right? So the equal sign is an operator, and it stands for, is this thing on the left the same as the thing on the right? Okay? Now we also have, let's say, we can compare this to that. Now, do you think that this guy is going to log true? Do you think it's going to log if, or do you think it's going to log something else? Something else? If. So it logged this. So this became true, right? So what it's saying that is, hey, you're comparing this guy to this guy, and yeah, they're true, right? So that's why we got this if logged. Now, this is the difference between the double equal sign and the triple equal sign. Okay, so if we did triple equal sign, we logged else if, because this guy was false. Okay, so basically what it is when you do the double equal sign, it compares the values of the two things on the left and the right. If the values are equal, then we're going to make it equal. And this is another one of those things in JavaScript, which is a little weird. And some other languages will be more strict on this. But in JavaScript, if you have a double equal sign, it compares the values. If you have a triple equal sign, it compares not only the value, but also the types. Okay, so that's just something to remember.
Can you repeat that last part? Sorry. It not only compares the values, but what else?
Also the type of the value.
Oh, okay.
So they have to be exactly the same. Not just the value, but also the data type. Okay. Now, there's also other ones which are, you can say, hey, if 45 is greater than 1, this is another conditional operator, right? If 45 is greater than 1, then we're going to log if, so that's true, right? We can say if it's less than 1, which will evaluate to false. So we got the second one here, right? There's also the operator less than or equal to, and there's also greater than or equal to. Pretty self-explanatory, but that's how you would write it out, with the equal sign after the operator, right? Now, there's another very important element to these conditional statements, which is you can also chain conditional statements together. So let's say that if 45 is greater than or equal to 1, let's run this. It's going to show me this first part, if. So that means that this guy is true. Now, we can also chain on other conditionals to this conditional, like this. There's this and, right? Two and signs. This means this has to be true, and the next thing has to be true. Okay, so this is that, and let's just say true. Right, to keep it simple, we can write any kind of conditional here, and whatever it is on the left-hand side of the and will get evaluated, and then whatever in the right-hand side of the and will then get evaluated in that order. And if both of them are true, they combine into one true. The and will combine them into one thing, and that one thing will get evaluated by the conditional. Right? So it's breaking it down into multiple blocks of conditions, and whatever operator you have in the middle here will determine how it combines the two. Right? So for and, both of them have to be true for it to combine into one true. If one of them is false, it combines into a false. Okay, so to demonstrate that, 45 greater or equal to 1, that's true. Right-hand side true, it's true. So both of these guys will become one true, and we'll see this console log if. So let's try that. Run. if. Okay. Now, if we change this part to false, this guy is going to be false. This guy is going to be true. The whole thing is going to become false because one of the two things is false, right? So if we run that, else if. Okay. There's also this thing called the or, right? 2 lines like that is an or. The or does the exact same thing as the and, except when it combines the two, as long as there's one true, it all becomes true, right? So if both of them are false, it's false. But or is like, hey, if this is true or if that's true, this whole thing is true, okay? So if we run that, even though this is false, this line will evaluate to true. This will evaluate to true because this guy is true, right? Let's see. If. So it became true, right? So keep in mind that you can chain as many of these guys as you want to. And at the end of the day, it'll all get evaluated into one thing, right? So these bunch of ors, in this entire sequence here, if one of these 4 things is true, the whole thing becomes true, okay? If we made all of this and, then out of these 4 things, if one of them is false, they all become false, okay? Else if. Okay, so any questions on the conditionals? Yeah.
Can you just go over the triple equal signs one more time?
Okay. So let's say I wanted to compare 45 as a number and 45 as a string. If I run it, I'm going to see that it console logged if, meaning that this got evaluated into a true. Okay. Now, double equal sign evaluates things the left and the right to compare if they're the same value. And as we see here, 45 is equal to 45. Now, if I put 46 here, then it'll evaluate to false, right? Now, if I did the triple equal sign though, it not only compares the value, but it also makes sure that they're the same data type. That's the extra requirement for it to become true. So if I did that, I would still see that this guy became false. Yeah.
One of the questions on the algorithm platform was talking about if from 1 to 1,000 log the even numbers, and it said, and so you had to do I percentage sign 2, and then it required 3 equal signs to 0. Can you explain, because the other ones for the odd numbers only required 2 equal signs, so I was kind of confused about why that was the case.
We'll talk about that later when we get into that problem. I'm going to show you guys how to do modulos later when we get into the basic 13, and when we get there, it'll be better as we're doing the assignment to kind of see that. Okay, but yeah, I'll keep that in mind.
Can I mention something about this?
Yeah, go for it.
It's important to know about this particular triple equals thing that you're talking about here, Andy. This is like a JavaScript thing.
Yep.
Like this is something that JavaScript does. Is it doesn't have a concept of like what they call strong typing, that you have a variable and they say this is a number, it's always going to be a number. In JavaScript, you can change things from, you can say this variable is now it's a string instead or whatever. So because it has that as a feature of the language, it also will try to do stuff like, are you trying to compare the string of 45 or the number 45 to the string of 45? Maybe the user really meant to actually want to compare those values, and it'll convert that string into a number at the time it's doing the comparison. So it does this like type conversion sort of in the background, and that can cause unexpected behavior sometimes. So if you really want to be sure, it's good to use the triple equals.
Yep. Yeah,
you
I
can
think
even do like, you can compare, false double equals 0. It's true that false double equals 0.
yeah.
So
like for example here in name, we gave it a string, right? So now if I wanted to change that to something else, I target the name of the variable and I give it 5 as a number. And still, if I console log name, we'll see that,
console.
oops.
You get the Italian
things.
Oh.
Conceal a little longer.
There, we got console log 5, right? So it didn't give me an error. In other languages, like Swift, for example, if you do something like that, it's going to literally crash your app. Because once you give it something, they're expecting it to be of that same type. And I can go deep into why that is, but in kind of a nutshell, it's like if you tell this thing that it's a string, it's going to do some stuff in the memory to allocate enough memory to hold certain strings. And if you say something is an integer, for example, it's going to allocate like this much for the integer. And all of a sudden, if you change it to a string, the thing that it was allocated before, all of a sudden may not have enough memory to hold that new data type. So in other languages where it's more important for you to kind of optimize your solutions and your code to kind of optimize for memory. For example, on an iPhone app, there's limited memory. You want to be more strict with your definitions so that the computer doesn't have to like shift around and like allocate different pieces of memory once you change this variable, right? It wants to make it consistent and optimized. And that is something that JavaScript doesn't really do. It's very loose, right? So there's a lot of things that are weird. But as you guys are learning it now, just know the basics and know that in the back of your mind, it might not be the same when you're doing other languages. Okay?
It's designed to be forgiving to beginners. That was one of the design goals of JavaScript when the guy created it, Brennan Eich. And so you don't have to worry about this kind of stuff, which is nice.
Yep.
But then once you know more programming, then it starts getting annoying. And then you're like, oh, why is it converting this into a number?
Yeah.
So when you wrote name equals 5, when you assigned it, did you rewrite the value of name?
Yep.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was like you have two now. You have a string and
Nope.
Oh, okay.
This is
Yeah, the string's gone.
I erased whatever is before. So think of it as when I create a variable, I draw out some space in my memory as a bucket for data. Okay. Now, how do I access that bucket of data? I access it using the name of the variable. So this bucket, this space in memory, let's say like 1,000 bytes of space is allocated. And how do I access this? Using that variable name. Right now, I'm declaring the variable, and that's what it does. It allocates some memory, and it lets you access it using the name that you gave it. Now, that's the first part. That's called variable declaration, right? This part here is called variable assignment, meaning that once I have this bucket drawn out and I can access it, I'm going to put some data inside of here, right? And that's what's going to be contained inside of that bucket. Now, when I do this, name equals 5, I'm erasing what was in there before and just putting this new data in there.
With the same bucket.
With the same bucket, yep. So the same bucket with the same name. Okay. Now.
So the first one is the declaration, and then the second line
Yes.
is the assignment.
Okay. Yeah. Let me show you in detail here. So var name like that. This is called variable declaration. Okay. So at this point, that box, that bucket is defined, and I can access that bucket using the variable name. Right. So let me show you. If I console log name here, what am I going to get? We did this before, right? What is it going to print? Undefined, right? It's going to print undefined. Oops.
Surprise.
Wait, what?
That's just JS.
Yeah. It's supposed to be undefined, right? JSBin is not cooperating.
In the browser's developer console.
Yeah. So if we inspect, yeah. Let's refresh this page. Huh. Well, I think we found a bug, right? Yeah. Ah, there we go. So it's something to do with that name, right? So if we named it something else and we console logged it without assigning a value to it, it's undefined. Because at this moment, the memory is allocated, but there's nothing inside of that bucket. So when we try to console log what's in the bucket, it's telling me that it's undefined, right? So it doesn't know what it is. There's no data in it, right? So right here, variable declaration, right? So if I want to assign something, I will target that same variable name. Using the equal sign, I can give it some value now. Right? So now we have declared the variable, and let's put this up here. Here is variable assignment. We declared it here, and now we're assigning a value to that bucket, and we're console logging n. So right now it should console log hello world. Right? So before, we kind of just did it in this way, where we had the variable declaration and variable assignment in the same line. So we can have this like that, right? So this is kind of just a shortcut way of declaring it and assigning it on the same line. And JavaScript has a lot of these special kind of syntaxes where you can do like, you can write a whole bunch of code, but somebody in the internet will write one line of code to do all of that, the same thing. So there's like different shortcuts, yeah.
If you're gonna bother with assigning a variable, why not just declare it like that way in the first place? Like, when what instance would you just have to change it? Does that make sense? Like, because if you're gonna declare it as this, elephant or something, and then you want to change it, you want to assign it to hello world, why would you need to do that? Do you have an example, I guess?
Well, I mean, if you have a maximum that you need to find as you're looping through your array, the max might change.
Oh, okay.
So you're gonna have to change. That's the purpose of variables, is that we can have them be undefined when we don't know what to put in there, and we can change it whenever we want to, because it's a variable, right?
Okay.
There's also these things called constants, which are very common in other programming languages, but in JavaScript, even though you can use constants, it's not. It's a new thing that came out with ES6, so a lot of browsers don't support it. Older browsers, so people generally don't use that. There is a way to do that though, but for the purposes of everything that we're doing in the algos and all of our code, we're just going to be using variables to hold all of our data. Okay. All right. Any questions about so far what we talked about? All right. Okay. So let's get into functions. Right. So all of this is recorded, so don't worry if I erase some of this. Let's talk about functions. Okay. So in JavaScript, we write a function with the keyword function, right? Afterwards, we can give it a name, like a function name, right? Let's say hello, like that, right? So that's the declaration keyword function. This is the name I'm giving the function, and then there's going to be a parentheses, and then the curly brackets, opening and closing, right? So this right here is all you need to declare a function with a name. Okay? There's also things called anonymous functions, meaning that you're declaring a function without giving it a name, right? You'll see that come up. For now, you're going to be declaring functions that have names, right? So this is a function, say hello. Every time I run say hello with the parentheses, I'm running this function. Okay, so a function is basically, it's a block of code that will run line by line repeatedly whenever you call the function. Okay, so if I had here, let's say console.log hello, and then world, like that. In order to run this function, I'm going to have to type the variable name and the parentheses to invoke the function. Right? So right here, I'm defining the function. Now let's say I comment this part out and just run this code as it is right here. What do you think is going to happen? Nothing. Nothing happened. Literally nothing happened, because just because I declared the function doesn't mean that it will run. In fact, when you declare a function, it's literally just you're declaring it, saying that, hey, it's here. You're not really doing anything to it yet until you call the function, right? So when you run the function, when you call it, the name, parentheses, in fact, every time you see some name with the parentheses, more likely than not, it's running some function, right? Look at this, console.log hello. Those are parentheses. So this console.log is a function, right? It's a function that is written inside of JavaScript that allows us to do this functionality. So here, now if I run this, it's going to say hello world. See? It runs this block of code, whatever is between these curly braces, procedurally, line by line. Okay? Now, let's say a question?
I just have a quick question.
Yeah.
When I was going over functions, I noticed on the Coding Dojo platform, you didn't have to semicolon out of a function, put a semicolon at the end of a function. But some other websites were saying that you always make sure that you semicolon the end of a function.
You mean like here?
Right there, yeah.
Yeah, no, you don't have to do it. There are a bunch of conventions that you should follow. JavaScript is one of those things where it's loose. Again, it won't break if you don't have that semicolon. In fact, I think what happens is if you miss a semicolon somewhere, the code will still run, but the browser, whatever is running the code, puts in the semicolon for you, right? So it's not that it's correct. It's wrong, but the code it's loose. So JavaScript will do a lot of things to make it work, right? So that's one of the characteristics of JavaScript. But there are validators that you can run your JavaScript code up, and it'll tell you where you need your missing things. Or if you use something like an IDE, like WebStorm, like an integrated development program, it'll actually run the code as you're writing it, and it'll highlight parts that you're missing, right? So different IDEs will have different syntax highlighting. I don't think that Atom or Sublime has that feature, but there might be some kind of a extra thing they can download to put it on there. But for now, just know that when you're finished with a statement and you want to evaluate the thing on the next line, typically we want a semicolon, right? JavaScript evaluates code based on these semicolons. So the way it kind of works is that when you run this code, the program or the browser puts all of this into one line. So because the computer, when it reads code, it just reads like one line at a time, right? So if everything is on one end, and it'll run everything. So the semicolon is telling the computer that, hey, I'm done evaluating this part and going to the next part to evaluate. That's a separate thing from the thing, right? So that's why we have these semicolons. And I think a lot of companies like Google has this minifier, JavaScript minifier. So you can minify your JavaScript, meaning that you write a bunch of JavaScript, you put your code through the minifier, and it gives you back a file of the same code, but it's all compressed into one line. And it makes it easier for the browser to read. It speeds up the process a tiny bit, but that's a lot of bigger companies will do that because they have a lot of code, right? Okay, so what else? Okay, so return statements. Okay, so if I return something here, right? If I return something here, it's going to be returned to me after I call this, after I run this function, right? So this is how I would use something like a return. Let's say I create a variable. Let's just call this the result. Okay. Now at this point, I'm going to log result, and it's going to be undefined. Okay. Notice that the undefined is on the first line. This is the second line and third line. It's because I console logged this and then I ran the function. So the code, the procedure of this code goes like this. It goes like, okay, you declared a function. Cool, I'm not doing anything. Okay, you're declaring a variable. That's cool. Console log this. And then that's why you get this line. And then once it's done with that, it's going to run this function here. And it's going to run whatever is in this function. That's when it does console log hello and does console log world. Okay, does that make sense?
No. I just don't understand why it's not in order. Like, because they called the function first and stuff, so why does undefined get logged first?
Yeah. This is a definition, so it's not used until you use it. So when you use it, it's looking at this definition and it's doing these things.
Okay.
And it's not, so I can put this, in fact, you know, something with JavaScript, I can put this down here and it'll work the same way,
Okay.
right? And this gets into something called function hoisting, which we're not going to talk about. You're going to learn more about that in the mean stack when you get deep into JavaScript, okay? But what it does is, you know, essentially, when this code is run, every variable gets hoisted to the very top. Every function gets hoisted to the very top. And then it evaluates everything else, right? So everything, we can just put it anywhere we want, and it'll still work the same way, okay? So now let's say, here's a question I have for you guys. If I say var result, console log result, it's going to say undefined. Now, what if I say result equals to say hello, and then I did a console log result again? Would,
Hello world, hello world.
so you're saying that it's undefined, hello world, hello world?
Yeah.
Just gonna be just hello world.
All right. So this guy's undefined, right? Because I have not defined this variable. It's declared, it's not defined, right? We get that. So I'm going to get rid of it. Now, here we're assigning this variable to whatever this function returns to me. That's what it means, right? So whatever say hello returns to me, I'm saving that thing that it returned inside of this variable. And then I'm console logging that variable. So what we see here is undefined. That means this guy actually returned to me something that's undefined, right? So let's say I return 2, like that. Now it should be hello world 2, right? So the thing that got returned, it's now saved in here. And with this line, I'm assigning whatever was returned to this variable. So the way you can look at it is, when you run a function, when you call a function, think of it as that function is going to be evaluated, and then it's going to get replaced by what's returned back. So it's the same as when I run this function, it's going to run and run, it's going to return 2, and it's going to be like that. Right? So that function will get replaced after it's finished running by the thing that it returns. Right? So just to further illustrate that in JavaScript, just a minute, in JavaScript, every function returns something, regardless of whether you declare what it is we return, like I just did with 2. If I just leave it blank, it returns to me undefined, right? And the reason I can see that is that if I console log, say hello, it's undefined, right? So this line here is this line console logged. So say hello, return back to me undefined in JavaScript, every function will return undefined if there is no return that is stated. If there is a return that is stated, then it'll return that thing that is stated. So here it should console log 5. Right? Now another important thing to notice about return is that every function can only have one return, and the reason is because when you return something, it exits the function. Right? So if I did this and I say console log hello, return 5, console log world, well, will I ever get to this line? No, because after you return this, it literally doesn't care about what's after it, it just exits the function. Okay? So I run it, it's just hello and 5. This part was disregarded because at this point, the function is over. It's done. Right? That's why when you have these like return statements that I see, this is not valid. I mean, it's not going to break, but anything under the first return is not going to be evaluated. So whatever it is that you return, that's it. That's the end of the function. Okay? Any questions?
So is it always better to have a return on your function, or
You can have it in there or not. I mean,
it's not?
if you don't have anything, it's just going to return undefined. Right? And that's always the case for JavaScript. Yeah.
So console.log is not affected by return. So if you have a function, console.log, it's always going to log hello, and then it'll go to return.
Yeah.
And then when you call say hello, it's only going to return the return.
Yep. It's only going to return the first return, because once the code gets evaluated procedurally, right? So whatever's on the first line will evaluate. Once that's done, it's going to do the second line and the third line. So when it gets to the first line, it's going to evaluate hello. It gets to the second line, there's nothing here. It gets to the third line, it's going to return 5. And at that point, this function is done. It's over, right? So nothing under here will ever get run because this ran and it exited out, right? Yeah.
So return is only used inside a function?
Yes. Yeah. Returns are only used inside of functions to either exit the function or to pass back some kind of value that gets replaced, that replaces the actual function call.
So it only can be a value, or it can be other?
It can be other things. It can be anything. You can return a function if you want, right? So let's see. Let's say that we wanted to return a function. Let's say this function is like this. Like that. See? The thing that got returned, that was replaced in this line, is the thing that I returned in the function. Right? And now this is something weird because not everywhere you'll have, this is like something that JSpin has done. But what you can do though is you can say hello, that returns this function, right? So if I run this function, I should see the console log hi. Right? Let's try that. Running the function with the parentheses. Yeah. See? And why do I see this undefined here? It's because this function ran, and it returned to me undefined because there's nothing to return in that function. And that thing got console logged in this way. Right? So console log hello, that happens first. And then I return this function, which is this. Right? So that function is now saved in the highlighted part. And then when I run the thing that was returned, it goes into this function and runs console log hi. That's where I see hi. And then when it's done, this guy will return to me undefined, which is now this whole thing now. And that undefined gets console logged in this last line. Right? I see more questions. Yeah.
No, I was just, so in the basic 13, when was it wrong if we just did the function and returned it but we didn't console.log it. You know what
Technically, it was wrong, unless
I mean? 'Cause
you
it was, well, it was written, wasn't it paper written out as a function?
yes, you could. What they wanted you to do was just console log it.
Oh, okay.
Now you can also console log it like this when you return the value, right? But you have to run the function and then console log that result. Okay. So I just noticed that it's 10 already, so we're going way over time here. But for functions, I just want to quickly add, there are these things called parameters, right? So let's change the say hello to say something. Okay, and we're gonna have a string here as an argument. So this is gonna be the word, right? This right here, when I'm defining this function, this is called an argument, or a parameter, or an argument. They're interchangeable, right? Basically what it means is that whoever is calling me will give me something, pass that thing into me, and now I can use this as a variable within my code here, within the block of the function. Okay, so here I'm going to console log word, and whatever it is that the person passed in, I now have that available to me as a variable with that name that I defined here, and it's just going to console log the thing that was given. So here, if I'm going to say something and run the function, I need to pass in the argument like that. Okay, so now if I run it, it should say hello. Whatever I pass in here, it's going to get passed and saved in this argument here. So I can console log that, right? So it's kind of like saying that, hey, whoever calls me, I'm expecting one argument to be passed in. So whoever calls me, I am going to give you one argument, right? So depending on what I give it, I can call this guy multiple times. I can call the same function multiple times, but it's going to print out different things because the argument is different when I passed in. Okay? Now, whatever you name it here, when you declare the function, is going to be whatever you use to access that. Okay? So they have to match. Otherwise, if they don't match, then I'm not accessing this argument, and it's going to give me some kind of error. See, word is not defined. Right? Another thing to note real quick, I can have two arguments or multiple arguments, right? So I can say num. So here I'll say console log word, and then I'm going to console log num. So when I call this guy, I separate the arguments with a comma, let's say 5, 55, 555, like that. So this is the first argument, and this order matters because the first argument that I give it will be saved in the first argument that I declare. The second argument that I pass it is going to get saved in the second slot that I declare, and you'll see that it console logged all of that. Right? And another thing to note that when you console log things, you can in JavaScript, you can basically like make your strings. So you can mix variables with strings, and they will all console log. So an example is like, say I wanted to make a string that said this is the word, like that, and then plus the word. Then when I run it, it's going to log the string that I gave it. With the plus sign, it's going to add the variable to that same console log. Okay, so similarly, I can do this. And it's console logging, the string that you give it plus whatever variable. And you can add as many of these plus signs as you want, and condense your, build up your string like that, so you get very clear console log of what it is. Okay. Let's see. Let's get into training nesting. Let's get into loops. Let's get into loops. So let's look at this. All right. So let's say inside of this function, I want a for loop. Right. So a loop is basically, something that will run over and over again. And a basic for loop, you guys have seen this, is first you declare a variable, I, for example. We're going to set it to 0, and then we give it the middle condition of when it stops, right? So say I is less than 10, and then we give it the forward progress that we will run every time that the loop ends. So what it is this is the initializer. This will initialize whatever it is that starts off the loop. This middle part is the condition to check if I want to do the loop or not. And then the third part here is the very end, what I'm going to do to that I to make the forward progress, to keep the loop going. Right? So here, I can just console log I. If I run it, oops. What is this? Okay, I think there's something wrong with JSBin. So let's make a while loop. So while I is less than 10, let's say I want variable I equals to 0, console.log I plus plus that. Well, yeah, I think it's I think there's something wrong with this guy. Okay, I think here's what we're gonna do. We're not gonna use JSBin anymore, and we're gonna go straight into the 13. Right, I'm gonna do them very quickly just to save some time. We're gonna do it in an HTML page, so we avoid this JSBin, these errors, and then we'll get into CSS, and the CSS will be a very short demo. Okay, it's going a little over time, so I'm gonna exit JSBin right now, and we're gonna look at the basic 13. Right, Kevin?
Yeah.
Do you have the graded basic 13s?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
I think I left them like right around here. Do you see them?
They should be on the table.
Just as a quick ask, guys, sorry, I need to do a head count of people that are filling in.
What are we counting?
Where's Pradeep?
Pradeep's over there.
Okay. And then that's 7, right? Yeah. No one new showed up, right?
I don't know if you know what I'm saying. This whole console.log thing
Thank you.
makes sense. That's just yeah.
Thank you.
It seems it almost seems separate than a function, which I don't.
Jim?
Yeah. Right.
Are you done with